The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting a pale gold over the endless expanse of the western plains. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and sagebrush. The lone cowboy rode along a narrow trail, his horse's hooves clattering softly against the hardened dirt, echoing faintly across the empty landscape. His silhouette, tall and lean, was outlined against the rising sun, a solitary figure traversing a world that seemed as vast and untamed as the sky above. The ranch he called home lay miles behind him, a small cluster of weathered buildings barely noticeable against the rolling hills, a testament to years of labor and solitude. He had lived this life for longer than he could remember. Days bled into nights with little distinction, the work unyielding and the company scarce. The quiet of the plains was both comforting and relentless, a constant companion that tested patience and hardened resolve. Yet, it was within this isolation that he had learned to read the land, to understand the subtle signs left by animals, the change in the wind, and the whispers of those who had walked the plains long before him. Today, however, the familiar rhythms of the world felt different, as if the air itself carried a warning he could not yet name. The trail curved around a ridge, revealing a shallow hollow where the earth seemed to sink slightly. There, half hidden among the tall, dry grasses, he spotted the small figure. The child was emaciated, wrapped in tattered rags that offered little protection against the early morning chill. The boy's ribs protruded sharply beneath his skin, his body trembling not only from hunger, but from the cold that had seeped into his bones. He lay motionless at first, save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the fragile rhythm of life persisting despite the obvious signs of neglect and suffering. The cowboy dismounted slowly, the leather of his boots creaking as he hit the ground. He approached cautiously, not out of fear but respect for the vulnerability he saw. The plains had taught him that survival required both vigilance and compassion. One could not thrive by brute strength alone. Kneeling beside the child, he examined the small frame, noting the cuts, bruises, and the deep hollows beneath the eyes that told a story of prolonged deprivation. Time pressed against him, yet he found no hesitation in the decision forming quietly in his mind. He would take the boy with him, no matter the consequences. Lifting the child carefully, the cowboy felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him like the dust of the plains clinging to worn boots. The journey back to his ranch would be long, the path rugged, but there was a certainty in his resolve that left no room for doubt. As he mounted his horse, the child cradled against his chest, the sun continued its climb, casting long shadows across the land that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The plains had always been a place of solitude, but in that moment, the loneliness felt less like a companion and more like a test. The ride home was slow and deliberate. Every sound, the creak of leather, the whistle of the wind through the grasses, the distant cry of a hawk, was magnified in the stillness. The cowboy remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The world of the plains was not kind, especially to those who were defenseless. And yet, he carried within him a quiet defiance, an unwavering belief that life, no matter how fragile, deserved protection. By the time the ranch's familiar silhouette emerged against the sky, the first hints of afternoon warmth had begun to soften the chill. Setting the child gently within the safe confines of his home, he moved about preparing what little provisions he could spare. The simplicity of the act, fetching water, preparing a meal, arranging blankets, was imbued with significance. Every motion was deliberate, every choice informed by necessity and care. The boy stirred slightly, a faint whisper of trust beginning to take root. The cowboy paused, observing this fragile spark of life, realizing that he had not merely rescued a child, but had invited a change into his own existence as well. Outside, the wind shifted once more, carrying the distant cries of unseen animals and the low hum of the open plains. The cowboy stood at the doorway for a moment, letting the sun warm his back and the weight of the day settle into quiet contemplation. The world beyond his ranch remained wild and uncertain, yet within the walls of his home, there existed a fragile sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the harshness of life. He knew that challenges would come, as they always did, but for now, there was a measure of peace. And within that peace, the first tentative threads of hope began to weave themselves into the fabric of two lives, bound together by circumstance and an unspoken understanding that survival, compassion, and resilience were inseparable companions on the plains of the West. The morning light crept slowly through the thin, dusty windows of the small ranch house, scattering pale streaks across the wooden floorboards. The warmth of the sun contrasted with the chill that had lingered through the night, settling into every corner of the modest dwelling. The child lay on a simple cot, the frail rise and fall of his chest barely perceptible. Every breath seemed a delicate negotiation with life itself. The cowboy had not slept, not out of restlessness but out of necessity, his sharp eyes and careful hands monitoring each shallow movement, every small sign of weakness or strength. The room smelled faintly of dried herbs, water, and the lingering scent of the plains. The cowboy moved quietly, fetching a small basin of water, dampening a cloth, and gently dabbing at the child's parched lips and dusty face. Each action was precise, deliberate. Years of living alone had honed his ability to attend to minute details with patient determination. He prepared a meager meal, a thin broth enriched with whatever scraps he could gather, understanding that even the smallest nourishment could make the difference between life and death. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, their vastness unbroken except by the distant silhouettes of mesas and the occasional lone tree. The wind rustled through the tall grasses, a whisper of the harshness beyond the walls. Inside, however, time seemed suspended, every moment compressed into the fragile heartbeat of a child fighting to survive. The cowboy adjusted the blankets, pulled closer for warmth, ensuring the little body was protected against both chill and fear. There was a rhythm to his movements, an unspoken understanding that care, diligence, and attentiveness could coax life back from the brink. As the hours wore on, he observed the subtle signs of improvement, the faint glow returning to the child's cheeks, the gentle flutter of eyelashes, the stirrings of small movements that spoke of strength returning. The cowboy remained vigilant, aware that even the smallest setback could undo all his efforts. He reflected on his own life in quiet moments, thinking back to his childhood, to lessons learned under the wide-open sky, to the countless days spent wrestling with isolation and the unforgiving landscape. Those memories fueled his resolve, an inner fire that refused to surrender to despair. By afternoon, the sun had climbed high, illuminating every surface, revealing the imperfections of the wooden walls, the worn edges of the furniture, and the dust motes drifting lazily through the light. The child's breathing had steadied, and for the first time, there was a hint of peace in his expression. The cowboy adjusted the blankets once more, then stepped to the doorway, scanning the horizon. The plains remained endless and indifferent, a stark reminder that the world beyond the ranch could be cruel and unforgiving. Yet within this small sanctuary, life had been preserved, fragile though it remained. The cowboy moved with deliberate care, bringing the child nourishment and comfort at measured intervals. Each gesture was a quiet affirmation of his commitment, a testament to the belief that the smallest acts of mercy could ripple outward with profound consequences. The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of the plains and the distant cries of unseen animals. Though he remained alone in the vastness, the cowboy felt a subtle shift within himself, an understanding that the life he was protecting was more than survival. It was a bond, a connection that tied him to something greater than the expanse of empty land. Evening approached, the sky turning shades of orange and violet as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened, creeping across the floorboards and walls, intertwining with the dust and the quiet hum of the settling night. The child lay curled beneath the blankets, eyes closed, chest rising with a steady rhythm that brought relief to the cowboy's heart. For hours, he had maintained a careful vigil, attending to every need, anticipating every weakness. Now, in the fading light, there was a small, quiet victory, an acknowledgement that perseverance and compassion had a power equal to the harshness of the world outside. As night settled fully over the ranch, the cowboy remained alert, the darkness outside both a threat and a canvas of possibility. The plains held secrets, dangers, and the unknown, yet within the walls of his home, life persisted. He moved to secure the doors and windows, placing a careful eye on every corner, understanding that protection was as vital as nourishment. In this quiet moment, the cowboy recognized a profound truth. Care, vigilance, and unwavering resolve could preserve life even in the most unforgiving of landscapes. And in saving this child, he had begun a journey that would extend far beyond the boundaries of his own solitude, altering the course of their lives in ways neither could yet foresee. The night air settled over the plains, cool and vast, carrying with it the whisper of winds through grasses and across hills. The cowboy stood by the child's side, watching over him as if guarding both life and hope itself. The struggle was far from over, but within the sanctuary of the small ranch, a fragile victory had been won. And with it, the bond between the cowboy and the child had been forged, delicate yet unbreakable, a promise that amidst the harshness of the Western world, compassion and resilience could carve out a place where life could endure. The next morning, the sun rose with a cautious glow, casting pale light over the rolling plains and the rugged silhouette of the lone ranch. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and dust, as if the land itself had something to warn him about. The cowboy moved with careful precision, tending to the child, now slightly stronger, yet still fragile, every small movement a reminder of how delicate life could be. The ranch, usually silent at this hour, seemed almost too still, the kind of quiet that pressed on the mind and sharpened the senses. As he adjusted the blankets around the child, the cowboy's eyes flicked to the horizon. Something stirred there, a subtle shift in the distance, a ripple across the undulating grasses that suggested more than the usual wildlife. The plains, vast and unbroken, had always been alive with signs, tracks, shadows, the distant cry of birds, but this was different. It was deliberate, a presence moving with purpose. For the first time since he had taken the child, a sense of unease settled into his chest, coiling with the calm morning like smoke curling upward. The child stirred, his small hand reaching instinctively toward the cowboy, an unspoken gesture of trust. The cowboy noted the change in posture, the way the child's eyes tracked something he could not yet see. He followed the gaze, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. There, against the soft haze of dawn, shapes began to emerge. Not animals, not mere shadows of the wind, but figures, moving deliberately, slowly forming a line along the distant ridge. Their presence was subtle at first, barely distinguishable from the rolling hills, yet unmistakable once recognized. A gathering, organized, purposeful. The cowboy's instincts, honed through years of solitude and survival, kicked in. He did not panic, nor did he react hastily. Instead, he observed, analyzing the movement of the figures, noting the rhythm and spacing, the silent communication in their formation. The plains had taught him that danger often announced itself subtly, and this was no ordinary threat. Yet alongside caution, there was a flicker of understanding, a sense that these figures, whoever they were, had a connection to the child, a purpose he did not yet grasp. He moved with quiet deliberation, closing doors, securing windows, and ensuring the child remained protected. Every action was precise, performed without panic, but with an underlying urgency. The air seemed heavier now, charged with anticipation, as if the wind itself had been waiting for this moment. The child's breathing, though steadier than the previous day, carried a nervous energy, a subtle mirroring of the tension permeating the room. Outside, the movement of the figures continued, their approach measured and unhurried, yet undeniably persistent. The hours passed slowly, each one stretching with the weight of uncertainty. The cowboy maintained his vigil, alternating between tending to the child and scanning the horizon. Shadows shifted with the sun's slow arc, casting long, stretching lines across the plains. He noted the detail of their movement, the deliberate pacing, the way some carried visible weapons while others moved with bare hands, the faint glint of metal catching the sunlight. There was power in numbers, discipline in formation, and a quiet dignity in their approach that commanded respect rather than fear. By mid-afternoon, the shapes had grown clearer, the horizon now crowded with figures stretching into the distance, suggesting hundreds of them moving with a silent purpose. The cowboy understood instinctively that this was no ordinary encounter. His mind traced back through every possible scenario, weighing danger against the connection he now felt with the child. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath, the wind stilled in anticipation, and even the distant cry of birds quieted as if observing the moment. The child clung instinctively to the cowboy's side, sensing the weight of the approaching presence. Though he could not speak, the subtle tension in the child's body conveyed an awareness beyond his years. The cowboy's heart tightened, recognizing the fragility of life in the face of such overwhelming force. And yet, alongside the caution, there was a quiet hope, an understanding that these figures, moving deliberately across the horizon, were bound by something larger than mere threat. They were connected to the child, a reminder that even in isolation, the world could impose its will, and sometimes that will carry a purpose beyond understanding. As the sun dipped toward the late afternoon, the figures on the horizon solidified into discernible shapes, warriors, determined and numerous, lining the distant ridge like shadows etched against the sky. The cowboy's mind raced, analyzing every possibility, preparing for confrontation, yet also bracing for revelation. The plains had always demanded respect and vigilance, and now, at the edge of the horizon, the full weight of that lesson unfolded before him. The child's hand tightened around his own, a silent plea and a fragile bond of trust. Beyond the ridge, the shadows waited, and the cowboy, alone but unyielding, stood ready to meet whatever fate these figures brought to his doorstep. The afternoon sun had climbed high, casting harsh light across the plains and illuminating the small ranch with a clarity that left nothing hidden. From his vantage point by the doorway, the cowboy watched as the distant line of figures drew closer, their numbers no longer vague shadows but clearly defined warriors. Each moved with purpose and discipline, hundreds of them stretching across the horizon, forming a formidable presence that seemed to dwarf the modest ranch he had called home. The wind carried the faint metallic glint of weapons and the rhythmic sway of banners, an unspoken herald of their arrival. The cowboy's heart did not race. His years on the plains had taught him the value of measured observation over panic. He surveyed the approach, noting formations, spacing, and the subtle gestures exchanged among the warriors. Their precision suggested training, their patience implied strategy. Even in overwhelming numbers, there was order, a silent testament to their power and coordination. He adjusted the child's blankets, ensuring the fragile figure remained protected, while every muscle in his own body tensed in readiness. The gates of the ranch, though simple and worn, represented the boundary between his sanctuary and the vast, unpredictable world beyond. He moved to reinforce them as best he could, stacking spare planks and securing latches, but the sheer number of approaching warriors made it clear that force alone would not guarantee safety. The air was thick with anticipation, charged by the collective presence of hundreds of beings who, though distant, radiated authority and intent. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath, the wind stilled in reverence or warning, and the usual distant cries of wildlife faded into a tense silence. The warriors reached the edge of the ridge, their shadows stretching long across the plains, merging with the contours of the land. Some carried shields, others weapons, while a few bore ceremonial adornments, feathers glinting in the sunlight. Their movements were deliberate, paced to convey control rather than haste. The cowboy observed the smallest details, the way their eyes scanned the horizon, the subtle signals passed between them, the rhythm of their march, all of it suggesting purpose beyond simple aggression. He realized that this was not an army seeking conquest, but a force bound by respect, tradition, and perhaps a debt unspoken. The child stirred, sensing the shift in the air, small hands gripping the cowboy's sleeve. The cowboy's mind raced through possibilities, weighing every potential outcome. Hundreds of warriors, disciplined and determined, stood at the threshold of his world, and yet, there was no immediate threat of attack. The tension was thick, a tangible weight pressing down on the wooden walls and the plains beyond. He adjusted his stance, positioning himself protectively, while understanding that the arrival of so many required more than mere vigilance. It required perception, restraint, and insight into their intentions. The warriors began to descend the slope, moving in formation toward the ranch. The sound of their approach, a rhythmic cadence of boots on the dry earth, carried clearly across the open landscape. Dust rose with each step, catching the sunlight in golden clouds that blurred the line between earth and sky. The cowboy could see the leader emerge slightly ahead of the rest, his figure taller, more ornate, signaling authority and intent. Every aspect of their approach conveyed strength and purpose, yet there was no overt hostility, no rush to violence. The cowboy sensed that the outcome of this encounter would hinge not on brute force, but on understanding the connection between these people and the child he had saved. Time seemed to stretch, the plains folding into a tense tableau where every heartbeat, every breath carried significance. The cowboy observed, prepared, and waited, aware that the events unfolding were beyond the ordinary measure of his solitary life. The warriors reached the base of the slope, their eyes fixed upon the ranch, their formation unwavering. The leader paused briefly, assessing the situation, and the cowboy understood that a silent message was being exchanged, a negotiation without words, conducted through presence, posture, and intent. Within the walls of the ranch, the cowboy maintained a careful balance between protection and observation. The child rested, unaware of the full scale of what approached, yet the cowboy's mind worked tirelessly, calculating, preparing for every possible scenario. The warriors stood at the threshold, their numbers imposing, their discipline undeniable, and the plains seemed to bend to their will. In that moment, the cowboy recognized the enormity of what had begun with a simple act of compassion. The child's life had drawn this vast, powerful force to his doorstep, and the outcome would test not only courage and resolve, but the very bonds of trust, understanding, and respect that could shape the fate of all involved. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ranch and the plains, the first step of engagement drew near. The cowboy's eyes never left the formation, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders, yet beneath it all lay a quiet certainty. The plains had a rhythm, the world had a code, and his choices, small though they may have seemed, had summoned forces that would forever alter the course of lives entwined by fate, courage, and the fragile thread of mercy. The sun had begun its descent, casting a warm orange glow across the endless western plains, painting the rugged landscape in hues of gold and violet. The small ranch, once a solitary bastion amidst the untamed wilderness, now stood as the focal point of an extraordinary gathering. The hundreds of native warriors, disciplined and purposeful, had reached the base of the slope and paused. Their leader, taller and adorned with ceremonial feathers that shimmered in the fading light, moved deliberately to the forefront, signaling both authority and intention. The air was thick with anticipation, yet despite the overwhelming numbers, there was no hostility in their presence, only a solemn acknowledgement of the bond that had drawn them here. The cowboy stood at the doorway, vigilant and tense, the child cradled carefully in his arms. The lessons of the plains had taught him to read intent, to sense the difference between threat and honor, and in this moment, he recognized a purpose beyond confrontation. The warriors were here because of the child, because of the act of mercy that had altered the course of their lives and, by extension, the life of the man who had chosen compassion over indifference. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath, as if the world were watching, waiting for the moment when understanding would replace fear. The leader stepped forward, moving slowly and deliberately, each motion measured to convey respect rather than intimidation. The cowboy observed, noting every detail, the sway of the feathers, the glint of the sunlight on his armaments, the subtle nods exchanged among the warriors. Though he could not know their words, he understood the message in their posture. They came neither to punish nor to threaten, but to recognize the act that had preserved the life of one of their own. The child, sensing the shift in energy, stirred slightly, a small movement that echoed the quiet tension of the moment. The plains stretched endlessly around them, yet within this confined space, the ranch, the slope, the immediate line of approaching warriors, an invisible connection had formed, tying the cowboy, the child, and the warriors together in a delicate balance of trust and acknowledgement. Every heartbeat, every breath carried weight. The cowboy realized that what had begun as a solitary act of compassion had now blossomed into a profound testament to human connection, respect, and the unspoken codes that governed lives on both sides of the plains. As the leader drew closer, the cowboy felt an almost imperceptible release of tension. There was no attack, no demand, only the quiet presence of those who had come to honor the bond between him and the child. The warriors formed a respectful circle at the edge of the ranch, their numbers immense yet non-threatening, their movements coordinated yet subdued. The cowboy understood instinctively that this was a gift of recognition, a silent promise that his actions had been seen, valued, and respected. The child, cradled in his arms, looked up with eyes wide and trusting, sensing the significance of the gathering without understanding its full magnitude. Time seemed to slow as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the plains and the ranch. The cowboy, standing alone yet not alone, felt the weight of his choices settle into clarity. He had acted without expectation, driven by instinct and compassion, and now the outcome surpassed anything he could have anticipated. The warrior's presence was a living acknowledgement that courage, kindness, and resilience carried power beyond mere survival, shaping relationships and destinies in ways subtle yet profound. The child stirred again, the fragile life now steady and breathing with quiet strength. The cowboy adjusted the blankets, feeling the warmth of the fading sun against his back and the steady weight of trust in his arms. Around him, the warriors remained, silent and imposing, yet protective rather than threatening. The plains, which had once been a realm of solitude and relentless challenge, now felt alive with possibility, a world where actions bore consequences both immediate and far-reaching. As twilight descended, the cowboy understood the full measure of the day's events. His solitary existence, shaped by isolation and endurance, had intersected with the lives of many, creating a bond that transcended fear, hostility, and distance. The warriors would remain until the night fully fell, their presence a quiet tribute to the life he had preserved, and in that tribute lay a promise. The cowboy was no longer alone in the wilderness. Through an act of mercy, he had become part of a larger story, a narrative of respect, connection, and enduring courage. With the sun finally dipping below the horizon, the plains shifted into shadow, and the first stars began to glimmer overhead. The cowboy, still vigilant, still aware of every detail of the land and those upon it, felt a profound sense of resolution. The child slept peacefully, the warriors stood watch in reverent silence, and the world of the West seemed, if only for a moment, aligned in balance and harmony. In the heart of the vast and untamed plains, compassion had carved a sanctuary, courage had shaped destiny, and the cowboy's fate, once solitary and uncertain, was now intertwined with the lives of many, a testament to the enduring power of mercy, respect,